It's the Dev Friday Show with Mark and Tim.
Well, I think we get to finish our conversation that we started last week. I have nothing witty to say because here's what happened. I was mixing last week's show, and it looked like it was going to take a couple minutes to finish up. And I'm like, I've got a couple minutes. I'll finish the code that I was working on last night. And then I look up and I see you're in the room, and I'm like, wait a second, it's 2 minutes till we go to the show? What in the world? So we will have hopefully last week's podcast up after this podcast. Since it's just mixed, I just haven't had a chance to upload it. And Mark, you haven't hit the fancy button that you have to hit now that the automation doesn't work. So I don't know if we're ever going to fix that. But
we still have to develop the automation, Tim.
Yeah, so it'll be up soon. But yeah, I was playing with some new code, doing some things. And we had our question from last week, our burning topic. You want to go right into that, or do we have some intro? Do you have some? You have some?
Well, I am a bit curious. The fact that you were like coding away before the show, and I'm kind of tempted to know what you were working on.
I'm glad you asked. And I think it's probably time to show this QR code up in the top. If you haven't gotten your ticket already to PHP Tech. There's a discount code right there you can use. Save yourself a decent amount of money on getting a ticket, and you really should. But I was working. I'm going to give a talk on something called HTTP Tortilla, which I have not. It's been around for like 2 years now. We've not really talked about it. Something that we developed at PhoneBurner to help us deal with HTTP requests.
Is that HTTP or HTT Tortilla? What do you do?
HTTP Tortilla.
Okay, gotcha.
So an open source library. And if you're in the PHP ecosystem, we've talked about this in the show before. We have PSR7, which defines interfaces for requests, HTTP requests and responses. And you have PSR15 that defines interfaces for middleware, which pass a PSR request to and from. And say, I'm gonna middleware, basically the signature is you've got a request coming in, and then you expect to get a response back. And there's a next handler, and that's how that layered middleware approach works. But that's what it comes down to is those interfaces expect a PSR7 request and response. Now, there's plenty of libraries that have compatible PSR7. There's many you can choose from. Once you choose from it, then you say, hey, I wish it worked a little bit differently. Do you really want to write it all yourself? Do you really want to reinvent an HTTP request and an HTTP response? No, I want to leverage somebody else's library. But there's some things that would be nice if I could change a little bit of its behavior. So instead of trying to extend it, which wouldn't really work out well, and there's going to be an article probably I'll publish sooner than later in PHP Architect. I don't know when exactly it'll be published, but that talks about some of the other options. It just briefly talks about them and why they're not that sustainable. So what HTTP Tortilla does is it creates traits, which are like mix-ins, but not really. I think did we talk about this? Traits are basically copy-paste PHP code on server side is really what effectively it is. That allow you to bring in
the equivalent
behavior.
Would be, from a code perspective, would it look like a decorator?
I mean, a decorator, I don't know. That depends on the language. I mean, I don't understand I understand what a decorator pattern is.
You have your little @ symbol above your method call, and you describe to say, have some information about the decorator.
No, it's code. It's code.
So what's the syntax for it? What does it look like?
The trait itself is what it looks like a class.
Oh, it's just a class. Okay.
And then when you bring it in, you say, yeah, I want to use this trait, and it's essentially like copy pasting all the methods into your class. But what that provides then for us is
back up.
Whoa.
So if it's a class, does it have is the trait a type for that class?
No. It looks like a class.
It's just a generic class then.
But it's a trait. In PHP, you create it with the keyword trait. It's not a class.
Oh,
it's a trait.
Okay. So,
but like the way you structure it and format it in the syntax looks like a class. So
it does have a type.
Well, but not a class type. But yes, it can't implement anything, right? Like so in type languages, you might be able to implement another interface or something like that. It can't.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But it's like I say, it's got a name. Yeah, it looks
so
like
is
like
is it more like a struct then?
No, because a struct is about data, and this is
So I'm
about
trying to
behavior.
understand. I'm trying to understand.
Imagine you had a bunch of methods in what looked like the fragment of a class.
I know what a class is, Tim.
And then when not a class. No, just imagine you had a file that looked like a class, but it wasn't a real class, and it had a couple methods in it. And then when you wanted to use it, you just like opened it up because it was just sitting there in your repository. And you're like, hey, I use these methods all the time. And you open it up and you're like, I'm just going to select these and copy. I'm going to paste them into my class.
Oh, okay. So
that is exactly what it's doing.
So it's basically a class, but instead of using the class keyword, you use trait.
Are you being intentionally hard to deal with this morning?
No, I want you to clarify this for me and for our many viewers who know nothing about PHP traits.
That's what I wanted to talk about. That's what I want to talk about. What is this email you got? Now we're never getting.
I love that the first tangent occurs here.
We're off topic now. Who's telling you that we're like the 479th or whatever listened to tech podcast, and also who knew there was 478?
It's funny after we got done with last week's show. I think it was about a couple hours. I got this email. This random marketing email said like, oh, it's like, but it was interesting. It happened like an hour or two after our show. You know, we just saw that your podcast is rated one of the top 200 podcasts in Australia. Based on iTunes statistics. I was like, whoa, okay, well that's something. But it's
is there iTunes statistics? I don't even know how to get
no. There is, but I don't want to really look at it because then I'm going to start to worry about the stats. And like, if I find that like there's only 10 people listening to us on iTunes, I'm like, well, I'll be happy there's 10 people, but then I'm also thinking, well, why is there only 10 people? And then I don't want that to start playing with my head. So
that's right.
I don't really want to worry about the stats.
But only you can see it because you set up the iTunes thing here. Is that
like, yes, I could log into it. Eventually, maybe if we get more of these requests saying like, oh, our show is highly rated in certain areas, that I might have to start paying attention. But it was one of these.
I don't know if I can see this.
It was one of these podcast tracking services that, you know, what they do is they accumulate all of the tracking data from like iTunes or Spotify, and then they package it up in a nice format, and then you could pay subscription, and then you could, see all the stats through this service. That's basically what it was. But I just thought it was kind of funny how it happened like a couple hours after our show. And also right after our show, about an hour after show, I got 2 emails, random recruiter emails for database manager or programmer jobs.
What in the world?
Which is also very interesting because that was also what we talked about.
Yeah, the reach of this show. And the fact that Mark is for sure afraid of the blob. So were these recruiters saying, yeah, we don't like the blobs either, and we need a developer that understands the danger.
It was just
blobs.
Funny the timing of that. Like that was what we were talking about, and then the fact like, and I usually get probably recruiter emails maybe like once or twice a week, but it was just funny. It just happened right after our show, and both of these jobs from 2 different recruiters were about database jobs. So what time? The AI is listening, Tim, and somehow it's feeding these AI bot recruiters, all this information just to kind of get me to respond.
Recruiters, or
recruiter bots, I should say.
I don't know if I should say this. Like in my view, recruiters are either the worst or the best. Does that make sense?
It's true. I think that's a good call.
They're either the worst or the best. I don't believe there's a middle ground for a recruiter. I'm sorry. Yeah. It's just.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm going to try something. I'm going to read to you from the manual what a PHP trait is, and we'll back see on the traits. Does a better job than what I have attempted to do. PHP implements a way to reuse code called traits.
Sounds like a class to me.
All right. Traits are a mechanism for code reuse in a single inheritance language such as PHP. A trait is intended to reduce some limitations of single inheritance by enabling a developer to reuse a set of methods freely in several independent classes living in different class hierarchies. The semantics of the combination of traits and classes is defined in a way which reduces complexity and avoids the typical problems associated with multiple inheritance and mix-ins. A trait is similar to a class, but only intended to group functionality in a fine-grained and consistent way. It is not possible to instantiate a trait on its own. It is an addition to a traditional inheritance and enables horizontal composition of behavior, that is the application of class members without requiring inheritance. So if you would say these 4 methods I want to share between these 10 classes, but I don't want these 10 classes to inherit from the same parent, you can use a trait. And the trait is just the fragment of a class that then gets pasted into each one of those. That's all it is.
All right, and the pasted part is kind of confusing to me. When you say pasted, what do you mean by pasted?
I use that to because I hope that helps people understand what a trait is. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe it's the wrong way to explain.
When you
it.
say
That's
injected,
what PHP
a better way
is doing. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Injected.
It's like but it's like copy paste code, right? Like what you and I would do is grab this fragment that I've used in 3 different places, copy it. Oh, yeah, let's grab it from this class and copy it and paste it over to this class. And it's like, well, it's the same thing. Okay, that could be a trait because that is all PHP is going to do when it evaluates that script. It's going to say, oh, it uses a trait. Take the code, paste it in, or include it, or whatever you want to call. You know, it's a way to include functionality in a class, without having to having to be an inheritance. Anyway, it sounds like
a struct to me.
That's not a struct though.
But you can reference.
You put behavior in structs.
Yes. Well, you can reference functions like methods that functions that you define and as part of a struct. Yeah, you can do that.
Okay.
So you can define behaviors. You don't do the you don't do the implementation of that. Well, you just reference a struct.
Oh, yeah. But that's the trait is the implementation of that. It's the actual.
Yeah, methods. I know. So you could actually define the implementation within the trait. I know there's a difference between it.
It's more than actually like you. Almost all the time, that's exactly what you're doing.
But with a struct, you could define a function outside of the struct, but then reference it in the struct inside. As a behavior, right?
Okay.
But I see what you're saying with the trait. You actually defining the implementation of that within.
Yes.
The trait.
Yeah, and now so traits do allow you to, like an abstract class, say I expect wherever I end up, wherever I'm included, wherever I'm whatever you want to call it, wherever I'm injected. I expect this method to also exist because I'm going to call it. So you can give a trait what is an abstract method and then say whatever class brings me in, I expect this method to exist on that because I'm going to start calling it. But anyway,
I like this, Tim.
Tortilla.
I love we're really getting technical. See, this is where the show. I know in the past couple of weeks we've gone off. But
are we going to lose our Australian users?
Well, maybe because maybe they went to the AI talk that we were doing the past couple of weeks, but now we're getting away from the AI. We're going back to the hard code because that's where developers.
We talked a little bit about this last week.
Developers should be focusing on that because so the AI doesn't take the jobs. They got to get back to coding.
That was the example last week, right? I pointed ChatGPT at this library. I pointed it at the article I wrote, and it had no idea what to do.
Yeah.
It started writing ridiculous examples. I'm like, no, you're not following this, bud. Anyway, so HTTP tortilla. Sorry.
And I say you guys should really work on the branding of this because when I try to Google HTTP tortilla, all I get is some soft tortillas. I don't get any nothing about HTTP tortilla. So I think you need to start working on the branding of this library because
it doesn't come up. I've not mentioned it.
It doesn't come up in Microsoft
Anywhere?
Bing. It doesn't. I don't know if it comes up in Google.
Maybe throw PHP on the end of HTTP tortilla. Maybe do that. Maybe
PHP.
Maybe that'll work. Maybe that gets you some.
Oh, okay. Well, 5 ways to make HTTP request in PHP and by Twilio. Oh, well, we don't want to talk about Twilio.
What in the world? What is going on? This show is off the rails.
Still, like I said, it's not coming up in Bing. I don't know.
Bing. I don't know about Bing. Use Google. Use a real search engine. Ask ChatGPT about it. Anyway, so this library, now that we're finally here, is simply a set of traits that do nothing more than implement all of the things that you need to, all the methods that need to be implemented.
Does come back in Google. I will say that.
See?
There you go. Okay.
So it's a set of traits that implement all of the required methods for the interfaces for requests and response and other related classes that do nothing more than expect you to give it another instance and a proxy to it. And the usefulness there is we can say, well, I want my own request object that has some special functionality, some additional methods that are useful to me, or I want to change some of the underlying behavior, but I don't want to write support for an entire HTTP request class. I already got a library that does 90% of what I want it to do, but I've got a couple of this extra stuff that I want to do. So you use the HTTP tortilla trait, bring it in. All you have to do is tell it, hey, here's how you get the underlying object that I'm wrapping. Define the object, define the methods that you want to extend or change, but everything else just works because it implements the interface.
There it is.
So it allows us to compose just a little bit more, maybe syntactical sugar. Maybe we want some named getters and things like that. We can create our own request, but leverage all the rest of the work from some other library, because we don't want to re-implement Git headers. Right? Like, okay, that works just fine. What we want to do is we want to say, hey, the method that the interface describes for getting the query params, give you an array of params. Maybe you don't like that because all the time you're getting an array of params. You're saying, well, is this parameter set? If this parameter isn't set, default to this value. If it is set, give me the one that, give me the value that the parameter is set to. Well, that's a lot of boilerplate code. What if you just had a method that was like, get query param, not get query params, which is what the interface defines. This gives you back an array, but get query param, where you could pass it both the key and a second value to be the default value if it's not set. And that'd be super useful for you, but it's not on the PSR interface. So you either find a library that defines that special method, or you write your own, or you use something like HTTP tortilla, which allows you to just add that one simple method and then proxy everything else to the library you always use. And now you have made it better for your specific use case while still implementing the interface, so you're compatible and you can interrupt with any other code, and you can use the other PSRs that require this interface. That's the value. So I'm working on, all that said, we've got the discount code, if you want to go to tech. I'm talking about this at tech. And the way that I'm going to talk about it.
Boy, I wish I was going, because you could really explain this code to me. I'm looking at it right now.
I could really explain. Give me a break. The way I'm going to present this is as a live code.
Yes.
Where I'm going to show a simplistic API made up of no framework, no nothing, just a bunch of libraries cobbled together. And I'm going to show some of the friction where it's like, man, look how I have to do this, all these steps. Wouldn't it be nice if I could just ask the request for this directly? So well, then let's show how we can make our own request to do that.
Your HTTP tortilla is basically a bunch of wrappers around the PSR interfaces.
It is traits that allow you to wrap one, yes.
But but I'm looking at the code. So I'm looking at the code right now because I want to actually know what I'm talking about here. And I understand the trait syntax. Like I said, it's a struct with implementations.
Like I said, okay.
But or class without a class that doesn't inherit anything. Okay. It does look
I feel like these are exactly how I described it, but keep going. Yes.
But basically you have all of these methods defined that are, and you bring in the request wrapper. I'm assuming that's from the server request interface.
It's so the PSR7, a server request extends a request, which extends an HTTP message. And at each level, I've provided a trait that wraps all of the needed methods to satisfy that interface. So at whatever level you want to, it's just basically implementing and adding and building on the methods needed.
Because it's interesting, you have the request wrapper, you use the message wrapper. Okay, so you have based on the wrappers you're making.
That's traits using traits. So you're just saying
tortilla is just a bunch of wrappers. Is that why I came up with the name tortilla?
Yes. Yes, all it is. It doesn't do anything. It just enables you to make an HTTP burrito, where you can say, I want to take the meat.
There you go.
Or the, I don't know, tofu, depending on where you fall, from this other library that does all of the hard work, but I just want to sprinkle on some cheese, or I just want to throw in I just want to add some of my own flavor. Well, sure. As long as you have the other existing object give it to your object, wrap all of the methods, and add your own method that you want, that you wish was there. Or if you're like, I really don't like the way this one particular method behaves. I have this library, it works great, but it doesn't parse JSON bodies. Okay, wrap that. And when you ask to say get the parsed body, look at it and say, hey, does the wrapped method, does the wrap object have a parsed body? If it doesn't have a parsed body, then look at the body, see if it's JSON. If it's JSON, parse it, and then give that back. So you can add on these behaviors as needed, but where you're only modifying just the part that you have to. You're not coupled to whatever library you're using because you're not extending that library. Because if you started extending third-party code, then you're tightly coupled to it. Now you're not tightly coupled to it. You basically can take whatever exists, as long as you give me a PSR 7 request, response, whatever. And the next thing that got really interesting was we started using this in the wild, was we started scratching our heads, and one of my devs was like, I just got to stop myself from saying it. That's the wrong way. One of the devs on the team, because we're talking
One of your devs.
Yeah, I know, right? I hate that.
Look
that.
at you,
One of the
Mr.
devs
Manager.
I know it's the worst. It's the worst. It's the worst. We use that language and it's terrible.
I hope you're not getting paid for more for that.
I know, right? So one of the devs on the team, looked at it and said, and see, I'm criticizing myself, and now I've lost my entire train of thought. Said, wait a second, we have these other things. What if they were responses? Like, instead of saying, oh, I need to make a response, what if we already had the response? What if this object was a response in itself? So now we have exceptions that are responses. You throw an exception, but it also says, I implement the response interface. And how do you implement the response interface? You just bring an HTTP tortilla. While you're creating the exception, you make a response and you tell HTTP tortilla, HTTP, I can't even say it, HTTP tortilla, you tell tortilla, I'm just going to go with tortilla. So when you, in the constructor of the exception, you make the response that you would like to show on the screen, right? Or be the API response. You make it and you just tell tortilla, hey, here's the wrapped response. Now you are one. So now as it bubbles up, something catches the response and catches the exception and says, I don't have to figure out how to explain this to the user because guess what? My exception tells me already how to represent it to the user. Just render that exception.
Now that I think what you just said is probably the most powerful thing about HTTP tortilla.
No, it's not, but it's close.
Well, okay. Well, because I actually been starting to read more and more about this, about the fact that using exceptions, not just for logging error messages or relaying error feedback back to the client side, but actually using it to reconstruct the appropriate response or the appropriate, what you're trying to get out of that when you have like a try catch, you're trying to,
or like actually put
something
decent payload in the exception.
Basically so use the exception for like as a correction in a sense.
Yeah. Like
cool.
What was the problem? And instead of just being like, no, an exception is sort of log it and fail, look at the exception, understand what that told you. What exceptional thing happened? And now what am I supposed to do about it? Because sometimes the exception says, hey, you were trying to do something with a third-party API and it didn't work.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't, you didn't get a 400, you got a 500. Or the exception you got was they never got back to us. It just, the request failed. Well, what should I do in those contexts? I should probably just pause a little bit and retry after a while. But if the API told me, no, this didn't work, well, then what do? I got to whatever I'm trying to do, I need to mark that it actually did fail. Right. And make the right decisions based on what actually went wrong, which means have either strongly named exceptions where you have classes that the class itself tells you what to do, or put more data in the exception to help other code understand what to do, or a combination of both of those. So
I think
I'm working on my talk.
And that's what I was going to say. I think you're setting yourself up for some great visuals for this PHP Tech Talk that you are going to be building. A lot of cheese, a little bit of beef, maybe a little bit of
so as I mentioned,
peppers being thrown on. Yeah,
it's a live code presentation. I won't have slides for this.
I think maybe you could throw up some like ASCII art could be throwing, maybe within the code or something like that.
Yeah, maybe I could ask. I could ask some
little emojis pop up there.
I use emojis in my code all the time. Yeah, that's for sure.
There you go.
I mean,
little tacos. I think they should be for that, right?
So I like that. I should probably use tortilla. I should use a tortilla emoji or taco emoji. for some of these classes.
And it's probably like a pepper emoji, maybe a beef emoji. I think you can work that out. Yeah.
I should ask one of these AI art generators to generate me some ASCII art of an HTTP tortilla.
Oh, I think ChatGPT would do a great job of that.
Can ChatGPT do ASCII art?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I'm sorry, not ASCII art, emojis. Like if you want to just get like a
like find an emoji that
so you don't have to like look up the emoji codes for it, or not the codes, but the
really, instead of looking up the emoji, you're just asking ChatGPT.
Yeah. No, but if you have a series, let's say if you have like a pair, it's like, okay, I'm gonna write it a paragraph and then try to replace as many words with emojis as possible.
Oh.
It would do something like that. And so it would be very efficient about
Is this how you communicate with your younger students?
Well, you have to. They only understand pictures.
Mark's like, I was going to send this message out to the class. Can you make it mostly emojis and then like shorten all the words, take out unneeded vowels and stuff? And yep. So ChatGPT's, it's like a translator for you. It's like Google Translate, but not. Interesting. But anyway, the talks live code. So there's an example that I'm working on. So I'm quick throwing together a example API, which also will hint a little bit about some other stuff I'd like to talk about at some point, which is the kind of the way we're looking at and playing with structuring APIs and how we develop them, which I think is a little bit novel based on all the other API frameworks I've worked with in the past. It's super flexible and I like how it works, but I'm building that and I was writing it in PHP 8 since I haven't got a lot of time to work in PHP 8 yet. And it is super fun. And that is why I was distracted. And that is why probably more like 28 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, I looked up and saw that we had 2 minutes before we were going to start the show.
And Tim, this makes me so proud that now that you've turned into a developer manager, you still have the time to get lost in code. You still have a stake into what your team is producing by providing input and code for what you're working on, not just telling other developers what to code, but actually providing additional sources yourself,
additional code or something.
I know. I was trying to think of the word. I couldn't think of it.
Yeah. ask ChatGPT. We'll run this through ChatGPT. So, I mean, that was the question that we left with last week, right? Should managers code?
Yes.
And I don't know, like I think that's it. What's your perspective?
Well, let's back up to the point where let's kind of do a little bit of review where we left off, because we alluded to this fact that this is something I wanted to talk about because of how the mass layoffs that's been happening in tech not just affects maybe newer employees or employees who don't have much tenure, even though it's kind of crazy kind of hear about some of the stories who developers like like Google or Facebook have been working there for like 10 or plus years, just have also gotten fired, for like no reason, or at least that's what they say. But it's interesting though that this kind of series of layoffs also affects managers, because a lot of the kind of a common thread with all these companies, what they're saying is that they want to start flattening. They want to flatten the curve. They want to flatten the promotional curve where developers feel the need to get promoted to managers. They want to start to flatten that, just like we flattened the curve before. Remember that? We did a pretty good job of that.
So flat.
But the thing about how instead of having or trying to still having managers, but not having as many of them, because what do really managers contribute? What do they really produce?
And to me, that's the question. Like, should managers code is one question, right?
Contribute. That was the word I was looking for. Contribute.
Oh, is that okay?
Yeah.
But I think a question that's worth asking is, what are managers supposed to do?
What is the job of a manager?
That's a good question. That's something I've been trying to figure out.
Specifically, a development manager.
Right. Like, because titles will be engineering manager, development manager. Mm-hmm. I think I've seen. I don't know if an engineering team lead is actually that. I feel like that's a similar position, and that's really.
A team lead or a lead developer would be also, that title would convey the fact that they are contributing, right? They're actively doing development, but they're
Sure.
Maybe they're doing more code review, a little bit more guidance of the junior developers, kind of, helping them and advising them, but they're still actively programming and developing themselves.
So
Right. But then once you get to the development manager, or I don't know, even like senior developer, that I would assume that would also be, you'd be actually actively coding. But but yeah, once you start attacking that manager role, like as a product manager, program manager, development manager, like how much work are they actually doing from a coding standpoint?
But it's also worth asking, how much work are they actually doing? Like, what work are they actually doing? And
Yeah.
I mean, I say that because like that's been the last year and a half ish of my life, is trying to understand, well, what does it mean? What am I supposed to be doing? Because what happened, to give a little background here, is the team is growing to a point where we have a CTO that the developers report to, right? Essentially, that's roughly the structure. The reporting structure is a little bit different than that, but it's basically what it boiled down to. And as the company grew, his time needed to be more focused on strategic things,
Which
right?
makes sense.
Like,
Yep.
And so it's like, okay, we need to fill this gap where someone, because we look at structure and we say, yeah, we need an org structure. Someone needs to be taking responsibility, or I might even use the word stewardship, of this team of developers. And it needs to be the thing that they are entrusted to, because the CTO has to be working a little bit longer range problems. Okay, so what is that person? How do you take care? How do you manage? And let's avoid trying to think what management means, because we all have ideas of what management means. But if that is the role, where there's a team and they are entrusted to somebody, what is that person supposed to do, and what is the role of that person?
I really like what you just said about the stewardship, which I actually don't hear that term used when you think about.
It's funny you should bring that up, because I put a little QR code up in the top right hand corner here, or left hand corner, because at PHP Tech, there's going to be an opening keynote, and the opening keynote, the title of it happens to be "Let Go of Ownership," and I'll give.
And who is the fabulous speaker of the first keynote of this conference?
I may be giving that keynote. But the whole point, and the thing that I hope to develop, and I'll give it away here, and because I don't think it's gonna ruin the keynote, I'll make the case a little bit longer there, and with a little bit more colorful illustrations. That one's not going to be live code. Is the idea that we can have an ownership perspective of things, or we can have a stewardship perspective of things. And the ownership perspective, owners tend to be defined by what they have, right? If I look at life as ownership, I start to be defined by what I believe I have, right? I mean, you could contrast that. You could say, like, an owner says, hey, you should see the boat. I shined it up last night. It's polished, and it's a great boat. Let me tell you where I got it and how amazing it is. A steward goes fishing. Like, the boat is just what you use to go fishing. It's not about the boat, and owners, the ownership mentality takes a picture of themselves in front of their nice shiny car, right? The stewardship mentality says, here's all the pictures I took on the road trip that I did with the car, right? An ownership mentality talks about all the talented developers that are on my team. A stewardship mentality says, here's the problems our team is solving. And it's a subtle shift, but I think it's critical, because when we take on ownership of stuff, we start to be defined by those things. And that's dangerous, because, I mean, you'll see it, commercials, marketing tells us this all the time. Ford had a commercial. It was, I don't know if you've heard it. It ran, I think, over the winter.
Wait, so
they said, everything you own is an extension of you. I hope not, because I own a lot of crap.
All right. Back up. So you're saying that, okay, so developers on your team working on a product shouldn't feel ownership of the product that they're working on?
No, I don't think they should. I think they should feel stewardship of the product. And I think a lot of times we'll tell people, hey, Bob, I want you to take ownership of this. We do not actually mean that. We mean, Bob, I think you should take stewardship of this. Because if someone said, if I had ownership of the dev team, which I do not, but if I had ownership of the dev team, I'm the owner, I get to call shots. I get to say what they work on. Do I get to do that? No. I've been given stewardship of a dev team where I am expected to help that team do the work that is in the best interests, not of me, because I'm not the owner, but of the company that has entrusted it to me. So success for me isn't measured in what I have, because if we flip the model and we say stewardship versus ownership, success is not measured in what I have. Success is measured in what I do. And that's why I think it's better to have a stewardship mentality than an ownership mentality, because in an ownership mentality, success is defined by what I have, what I've acquired. And people can say, yeah, I'm not that person. It's not about it's not about the house. It's not about the car. Yeah, that's fine. That's not even probably the most dangerous things to think that you're defined by. I can sit back and I can say, well, I'm defined by my job because it's what I have. I'm not. Am I defined by the code that I wrote? Because that's what I have. How long have I been doing this? 15 years? I have 15 years worth of code that I've written. Now, if I look at it as I own that code and that code reflects on me and that code is part of my identity, that's unfortunate because I've written a lot of bad code. But if instead
but that's still part of you as your journey as a developer.
But it's not, but if I look at it from like, this is my code and it is not the flip. And this is what I'm trying to figure out how to articulate well in this talk, right? When I look at it, it's just the thing that I have, just the thing that I have in my hands right now. And the thing that defines me is not all that. The thing that defines me is what I do with what I have right now, right? And it applies to far more than code too. Like there's a certain amount of talent and natural ability that I have, right? There's also a certain amount of talent and natural ability I do not have.
All right. So let's flip it. So if you were, because I guess the ownership word I'm just getting hung up on. So do you think that developers could use, is there a aspect of their job or what they do, the code, whatever, where they could claim ownership in a positive way?
I think they could claim stewardship in a positive way.
So you're saying ownership is out of the door. Don't even want to consider it.
I think when you move to an ownership mentality, you lead to you grasp things too tightly in your hand.
Because I do agree that I love the stewardship. I love also focusing on the work, focusing on the service in a sense that you're providing.
This may also help. The entire thing is predicated on the fact that we have models, and our models are never accurate. They may be useful, but they're never accurate. So we can't say, yes, it is all stewardship. No, I'm just saying it's better to model it as stewardship than it is to model it as ownership.
But I do feel that just like personal responsibility, people should own thetheir mistakes and could also own their successes too, in a sense, because that's part of the journey of life. And, it's developer too. Like I said, we've all written bad code in our lives, especially when we were young, right? But then that's how we learn. That's how we evolve. That's how we grow. And I think
you're saying you would own that code. I'm saying
I would own. Yes, you own it as like a holistic perspective of saying, okay, this is me, right?
But what do you do with things that you own?
Well, I have them around me, I guess, right?
And they belong to you, right?
Yes.
It's that relationship. When you model it that way, now this bad decision belongs to me. It belongs to me. I'm never going to get rid of it.
Well, it doesn't say no, not necessarily that you're not going to get rid of it, because I've owned things I've gotten rid of, sold or traded or gave away.
Right.
So you could, like I said, it changes. It's ownership is a constant state of change. But I think there are some aspects where we can own things, but in a positive way.
And I'm saying like that model, I think, is better described as being stewardship. Because if I look at it and I say, I'm going to own my bad code. Yep, that was mine. It belonged to me. And I
Well, when
wrote
you
it.
do a code review of somebody, you kind of have to acknowledge the fact that that developer wrote that code.
Yeah. I'm not saying you didn't write it, but I'm saying when we model it in this mental image of that is something that now, along with everything else in life, I'm just dragging along with me because it's in my hands and it's mine. If instead I say, maybe I just, and I'm not saying it's a perfect model. I'm just saying it's a more useful model to say, how about I look at that as just, I wrote it yesterday. Now it's in my hands. It's something the past me has given the present me. And the thing that is success isn't reflecting on the mistakes I've made. The thing that's success isn't acknowledging, look at, I once upon a time, I thought I could write an ORM. That was dumb. Instead of reflecting on that and making it part of my identity, the thing that really should be my identity and the thing that really should be how I measure success is not what I own. Like you said, failures, own your successes. And then if I balance it out and it's look, if I put a table here, I've got more failures than successes, or I've got more successes than failures. So I feel good about myself. How about we just erase that and say all those things are things that the past, whether it be you, whether it be what people have done to you, whether it be what you were born with, all that is just what the past has given me right now in this very moment. Success isn't the sum of all that. Success is what I do with it right now.
Wait. But you are the sum of your past experiences. You are. No, I totally agree with the fact of like we need, not focusing on the past or let going of the past, but you do have to acknowledge the past at some point.
I'm not saying let it go. I'm saying look at it as if now this is all of the pieces that I have in my hands right now. And at this moment, what success isn't counting those things. Success is what I do with what I have, what I've been given, whether I've been given it from my past. And that is what I'm saying. That's a stewardship mentality, because a stewardship mentality says, all I care, I don't own it. Like a steward doesn't own stuff. A steward is given things, and then success is based on what they do with it. So instead of me coming from an owner, where an owner goes, oh boy, look at all this debt I have behind me, whether it's technical debt, whether it's real debt, whether it's problems, whatever. A steward says, all right, that's the situation I'm in. The question isn't, let's think about all that and make that define me. The question is, what am I going to do with it? And success for something, and that's why success is in that way. I can be successful, you can be successful, even if the output doesn't look the same. The question isn't what's the output. The question is, what did you do with what you were given?
I guess I'm just getting hung up on the word ownership when it comes to more, not physical things, right? But more kind of like you've talked about, like code written in the past, right? So like, especially code you're never going to look at again, but like, oh, I worked on that for me, like that e-commerce system that I wrote for that food ordering service, right? Remember that?
Really?
Remember that?
You worked for Grubhub?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I was put out of business by Grubhub. But think about like the positive, both positive and negatives of that.
Right.
But then I said, like, yes, I wrote that. I own that. I did.
Right.
But I also moved past it. I acknowledged the fact of like the positive and negatives, learn from it, and then took that knowledge into the future.
So that's where, like I said, the models are fuzzy. And I'm just saying, approaching it from a standpoint, because there could be some people that like for the rest of their lives, yep, I failed at the startup.
Yeah, I know that's
not failed because I own that, because that is me.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, instead of that, just be like, okay, that happened.
Yeah.
You have it.
I totally
now.
agree with that. Yeah.
The question is, what do you do with it? So yes, the models are going to be imperfect. Every model is imperfect, but some are useful, right? And as developers, we know that, because we sit back and we model a user. And we're like, what's a user? Well, they've got an email address, and they've got, I don't know what else they have. Maybe they have an actual address. Maybe they have a username. And that's the user. That's not the user. That's not even close to what the user is. It's an imperfect model. but it's useful for us to accomplish what we need to accomplish. The models that I'm putting up, both of them are imperfect, but I find that trying to look at things from a stewardship perspective, where it's like, hey, yeah, this is the house that I'm in. Guess what?
Mhm.
There's things about it I wish were different. But the question isn't how I could have done it differently in the past, so I would be owning something different right now. The question is, what am I going to do with what I have right now?
So bring this back to the manager question. So using the stewardship model, how would you apply this for a manager role? So instead of a manager assuming like, okay, like I said, I totally agree with the manager looks at the product that they're managing or the developers that manage, and they say like they own that. I agree that even though I think there is something to be said about developers, even managers saying they own they have some part ownership in the product in the sense of like, yeah, they feel some value to it. They feel a connection to it, right?
Mhm.
They feel they're bought into it, right? They have a stake in the game.
Mhm.
So I feel there's some value to it. I'm not sure how you describe that. Maybe I think I'm just getting hung up on the word ownership. Then maybe there's another way better. And I do like the word stewardship, but I think also from ownership to stewardship, there's a big, from a definition standpoint, it's a big disconnect. I don't know. It's kind of big distance between the two, just from a term perspective. How you describe things.
I mean, they're different. They're kind of the opposite of each other.
Yeah, well, that's
Like
what
the
I mean,
opposite
I
of
guess.
stewardship
Yes.
is ownership, right?
But I think, well, my thing, there's kind of a middle ground. I think there's something in between that, which I don't know how to describe that. But my gut feeling is like there's something between that that's like a sweet spot between ownership and stewardship that could be a good fit for this. You're saying go all in on stewardship. I'm like, guys, yes, I totally agree with that part. But I'm like,
Because from a steward's perspective, you say, this is the product I've been given.
but from a mentality standpoint too, I do think there's some good aspects of ownership that could be brought into a team or within, developing on a product. I think there's some aspects of that.
But my perspective is that is encapsulated in the notion and the model of stewardship, because then you're saying, this is what I've been given. Now, what am I going to do with it? What am I going to do with it? And the reason why I think it's such a powerful concept,
but you've just been giving as a thing, like an arbitrary thing that like, okay, it's a thing in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm getting paid for it, but I don't really have any. It's just a task, right?
You could look at it like that.
Stewardship
That would
of this task to complete this task that's been put in front of me, but I have no.
Bad
not really.
No, but the product,
I have no stake in it. I have no, like, why do I even care about it then?
But think of, well, you should, because you were given it. You were entrusted it. Like if I gave you something and you cared about me.
Let's take the money out of the equation, even though this whole conversation started because of why do managers get paid more than the developers? But take the money equation out. Like, why, if you just give a task to a developer, why do they want to complete it?
But you're thinking of it in a micro way, like right, like take stewardship of this task. No, I'm saying take stewardship of this product. Not ownership of the product, but stewardship of it. That here I'm entrusting something that is precious. It's precious to our users. It's precious to our company.
Mm-hmm.
It's precious to your family, because the success of it is going to depend on whether or not you still have a job. I'm giving that to you. I'm not giving you the weight of now it's all on me. I'm just giving you that thing and saying, now, what are you going to do with it? And to some developers, maybe they get a little less because they're not there yet. They're not a senior. To other developers, maybe they get a little bit more because there's more that they can be expected to do. And I'm going to entrust that to you and see what you do with it. But I'm not going to tie you to it and make you feel like somehow your identity is in line with that, especially imagine you're a dev that comes to work for a company and there is a very legacy code base, right? It's not yours. You didn't write it that way. You can either take an ownership mentality and be like, I didn't write this code. This is terrible. I can't believe the people who did it. Or you can take a stewardship mentality, which is say, hey, this is the code we got. Whether I like it or not, whether it's the way I would have done it or not, and it's mine to steward for now, and then I'm going to let go of it, and it's going to be somebody else's to take care of eventually.
And that's a great example of going into a legacy code base, and then because we've all been there. I'm figuring like, oh, well, who is this developer that wrote this code? Why'd they make these choices, right? And then you kind of like in your mind goes to like, yeah, I didn't do this, so why do I have to fix this? Why do I have to evolve it and make it better. And I do agree that so a stewardship approach does to kind of provide that as a model for servicing that legacy code base. I totally agree with that. But then once the developer does, let's say, refactor or enhance or add additional features, there some buy-in at that point?
I mean, you can look at it that way if you want, but I'm saying you can just look at it as if this is the change I made and I'm going to hold on to it loosely because there's going to be somebody else on my team that's going to come along. And I can look at it and I can say, no, that's my code. You shouldn't change it.
Oh,
or I can say, no.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Or you can just say, no, I wrote it. Yeah, I wrote it. And I passed it on. And it's not, I'm going to hold on to it loosely. I'm not going to think of it as an owner. I'm going to think of it as a steward where the work that I do is just, it's done in the moment. I'm going to do the best with what I have right now. And then I'm going to continue to do that. And I'm going to continue to do that. And we can apply that to our career. Is success that I have this job now? No. Success isn't that I have this position. Success is what I do with the position. Just like before, success wasn't whatever position I had before. Success was what I do with it. So instead of looking at it as I'm going to get to this point and then I'm going to hold on to whatever it is that I got, and that is going to be the thing that gives me value, I can instead say, no, the thing that gives me value and the thing that defines my value is not all the things that I may say I have, but it's when I take inventory of my life and I see the things that have been given to me. And given, I know it's a model. So it's like, that wasn't given to you. You did that. Yeah. So past me gave it to me. But it's the baggage that I carry with me. It's the things that success is what I do with that right now. Success is not the sum of all those things behind me. Because if it's the sum of all those things behind me, success is a pretty pathetic notion, because there's things that I can't ever accumulate that somebody else can. And there's things that I can accumulate that somebody else can't. So if that's success, that's a pretty terrible metric. But if success is what I do with what I've been given, right? Success, I mean, we talked about it on the show, so there's no secret here. Obviously, where we are as a company, the company I work for after the FCC notice, it's not where we wanted to be. We could either go, oh, yep, we're gonna take ownership of that and be like, yep, that defines us. Or we can say, no, that's just something that was given to us. Now the question is not what happened to me. The question is, what do I do with it? And we could have sat back and say, well, it's unfair. We didn't think this was right. This shouldn't have happened to us. And it's really hard. And, oh, well, it's too bad that ruined us. Or we can say, it's not going to ruin us. Yep, that's something that happened to us. We didn't ask for it, but it's what we were given. And now the question is, what do we do with it? And when we take that mentality, that's success, it doesn't matter what happened. It doesn't matter how much it affected us in that kind of external influence and what it caused to us. It matters what we do with it. But and you can sit back and say, but you still need to.
But you still, maybe you're just jumping over the part. You still need to assess. You still need to acknowledge.
Yeah, and that's a steward acknowledges it all the time.
I guess it's the words that keep popping in my head is responsibility and acknowledgement.
But that is what stewardship is. Stewardship is, I sit here, I don't own a thing. All I do is manage what has been given to me. And I'm just saying, look at life as life is throwing a bunch of stuff at you all the time. Stop thinking that when you catch it and it's in your hands, that somehow that defines you, and start thinking that what defines you is what you do with all the things that life throws at you. And that's the stewardship mentality. So, what's a manager supposed to do? Well, we've run out of time again. What in the world?
We just started ranting about this. I don't know.
What's a manager supposed to do? A manager, that's been the thing that I've been puzzling over for a year and a half. I'm supposed to steward this team. What does that mean? Well, I know what the company wants this team to do. Okay,
then maybe that's my thing. I told this whole 20-minute rant you just went on. I think it's 100% accurate for managers. I totally agree with that, especially as how you approach the work of your developers and how you support the product. Maybe I'm thinking about it from an individual developer standpoint on being underneath the manager and thinking about my work. That's where I'm having a little bit of a disconnect thinking about, I don't know. It's kind of like, I'm not 100%
concept,
there.
though. It's a similar concept because as a developer, it's not for me to build this feature. It's a feature that's been given to me. Someone said, hey, here's what the customer wants to do. Now I'm going to give it to you. What are you going to do with it? And you're going to have to make decisions. You're going to have to make decisions that maybe you don't even like, but you have to do it because the constraints that were what? Given to you. The question isn't, what do you have? The question is, what are you doing? What have you done with what's been given to you? So like I approach, and I bring this.
But if something's given to me, I still kind of have it. I still kind of own it in a way.
But you steward it. That's what you do with things that are given to you. You steward it. That's the terminology. Like a steward says, I'm going to look at things as if they were entrusted to me for a moment. And that's a very good way to look at things too, because in this world, everything really is temporary.
And I agree with that. Yeah.
So I'm going to look at things as
nothing's permanent. I agree with
they're
that. Yeah.
trusted to me. And yeah, if we want to go through the exercise, and this doesn't come from like me reflecting on what management is. This comes from me, and I'll talk about a little bit about this at Tech. This comes from me like dealing with the fact that my grandparents moved in with us. Then my grandfather died. A year later, my grandmother died. A year and a half later, my dad died. And like going through and saying, yeah, everything's temporary. Like everything around me is changing. And then when the things that I really care about the most aren't the cars, aren't the house, it's the people, it's the relationships, right? And guess what? They don't really belong to me. There was zero that I could do to stop that from leaving. I didn't own that relationship. It was its own thing. Just like I don't own my job. Part of like when my grandparents were here and my in-laws had actually moved in, and then there was a family downtown, and we were helping and providing for them a little bit. I lost my startup job, and it's like, well, I say it's my job. Apparently, it wasn't my job because I didn't get to keep it. Somebody else made that decision, right? It's what was given to me and what was taken away from me, and then success isn't the sum of all those things. Success is the one now that this is what you have. What are you going to do with it? And it's reflecting on that and then seeing how, that even impacts how you would manage a team. That even impacts how I look at my code, because we have far too many developers that look at their code and they own it. And they feel bad when someone says, hey, that was wrong. Oh, you're saying I was wrong. How about no? How about we're saying the code needed to be improved? You wrote it. You passed it on. Now I'm stewarding it from a code review perspective. I'm looking at the code, and stop thinking that it's somehow your identity, because it's not.
Well, it's not their identity. It is their code.
It is. It is. That's what I'm saying. But when we own it and we get really tied to the stuff that we do, and we stop thinking that it's in the moment that really matters, and it's what we do with what we have right now, and we get too hung up on all of the rest of stuff. And
you know where I think I'm going with this in my head? It's like temporary ownership, and that's where the in between. We're like
temporary ownership is called stewardship.
In the moment when I am building that feature or trying to fix that bug, I am owning that in that moment when I'm trying to work through that.
But temporary ownership is not stewardship. Somebody's entrusted
once
it to you.
Once you then commit it, push it forward, or if it gets code reviewed, you still have to acknowledge that that's the code you wrote. But
then I gave it to somebody else and said, you manage it. Like,
oh my god! Oh my gosh! This is like, wow! I cannot wait to hear the feedback on your talk here.
So should managers code? Do we have an answer here, Mark?
There. Oh my gosh!
Do we have an answer? I think the only question we ask is what should managers do, and I don't know that we even have an answer for that.
Oh my gosh!
So there's always next week, right? Should that be the title?
This is a series. I guess this should be a series, right?
Apparently,
eventually work through this. I don't know.
How we doing in Australia? That's my question. Is this engaging with?
We will steward this podcast as best we can.
See, that's the truth.
Because we don't own it.
Because we don't own it.
I don't want to own this podcast.
Mark, do you really own anything? Do you really own anything?
You sound like such a socialist right now.
No, that's not socialism. Socialism says everybody owns everything.
I didn't want to use the C word, Tim.
Communism? Is that the word you didn't want to use? I don't think it's either of those. But anyway.
Well, that's kind of what they would say. You don't own anything.
Go
to North Korea. That's what they're going to tell you.
Well, you don't own anything. I do. I think that's how that works. I'm not sure. You've been closer to North. You fly through there once?
What? I went through
You didn't-
China. Yeah,
You went through
yeah.
China. You went through China.
Yeah, I went
That's
through
right.
China, yeah.
That's right. Well,
I always wanted to go to North Korea, but my wife won't let me. But
all right. There's always next week. Maybe we'll get to those questions then. Well, we
geez.
provided a show. That's for sure.
Yep, there you go. There you go.
All right. I'm gonna end said stream.
And the whole reason I brought that
Oh,
topic
maybe-
up was to
maybe I'm not
talk
gonna
about the money issue. We never got to the money issue.
Oh, you were gonna circle back to the money issue after Should We Code?
Well, that was the whole reason this started. It was just thinking about, my career working with managers. And that was the reason why developers always wanted to go on this kind of a ladder from going from a developer to like a
to
junior
make more money.
developer to full developer to lead developer to senior developer. And then eventually to go up to a manager role is because not only to make more money, but to do less work, to make more money for less work. Like to get out of the kind of the
More money.
grind.
So they want to do more money for less work. Okay.
Yeah. That's what I've always that's what I've seen over in my career. So that's
code work.
that's where I wanted
Yeah.
to get to. Yeah. Which
Yeah.
is interesting. The industry though is pushing against that now. That's what it
Yeah.
looks like. I don't know.
Yeah, and
How's it
I totally agree in that. Like as we look at our team and how we grow and how devs grow, it's like there needs to be a path that is not you have to go into management to continue to grow and to continue to feel like you're being engaged and the value that you bring to the company is more. And therefore, obviously, the reward is more, right? So there needs to be a path. Oh, you hit the ceiling here. Now you have to become a manager. No, that doesn't. Yeah, hopefully we'll challenge a lot of that as our team grows. But interesting topic.